Let me tell you something.
Okay.
What I want to do is to make our community a safe place
Welcome to expediTIously. I'm your host, Tip T.I. Harris. Now, here on expediTIously, we have conversations that push the culture and the community forward, and we have them with people who are relevant to the discussion. Since today, my two guests are in the political sector, I will not do my normal introduction because I think it's my responsibility to not tell you who they are rather than allow them to show you who they are. So I'll mix it up a bit today, and I'll give both of you, say, a minute or so to introduce yourselves to our listening audience. Christian, would you like to go first?
Well, first of all, appreciate you for having me on the show, and it's an
Right
honor. And my name is Christian Wise Smith. I grew up in the justice system in Cincinnati, Ohio. I grew up seeing my mom in and out of jail, and so overcoming that, that pain, grandma in and out of jail, uncle serving life for murder, being kicked out of school in high school, didn't know if I would graduate. And so to go from that to now being an attorney, working in the justice arena, the justice space, and then running for Fulton County DA, that's why I ran, because there's nobody like me leading any criminal justice organization. And I think that it takes somebody who has that background to go in and make the changes. So that's why I was able to connect to a lot of people. That's why I was able to offer people hope that we could change the justice system. And that's why I'm an attorney that I would say that fights for people who normally are overlooked.
Right on, right on. And that's where you and I met on your campaign for district attorney in the primaries. And you galvanized the interest and intentions of an entire community and the new generation. Now, over to my left, brother who his reputation precedes him, and I don't know if you really need to give an introduction to yourself, but I will allow you to, sir.
Well, first of all, I am really pleased to be here, Tip. Glad to get a chance to be here with you and to be with Christian and to get a chance to talk with your audience directly. But my name is Paul Howard Jr. First of all, I'm a husband and I am a father. I've got 3 children, one son and 2 daughters. I grew up in South Georgia in a little place called Midville, and I'm sure most of your audience has never heard of it.
I've never heard of Midville.
A town with only 300 people and an agricultural community. And I grew up during the period in history when everybody told me no. When you decided that you wanted to do something positive, people said, no, you can't do that. One of my most early experiences happened when I was in what we call junior high school. My class and I decided to attend a court proceeding. Nobody in my class had ever been to court, and when we got to court, we were placed in a special section. We were so naive, we actually thought they had reserved it for black kids. We didn't know that we were actually segregated. But when the trial finally started, 2 African-American men, and they were charged with aggravated assault. And even though that's been so many years ago, I can still remember, because the guy who was supposed to be the victim, who was a white male, actually got up in court and said, if those 2 N-words if my gun hadn't stuck, those 2 N-words wouldn't be here today. I was shocked. The people in my class were shocked because we did not know that you could say those kinds of things in court. And even though I was young, I made the decision then that I wanted to do something to make sure that any black man or woman, or anybody for that nature, would not have to suffer the humiliation that you could see on the faces of those 2 black guys. And so I decided I wanted to become a prosecutor. People said you couldn't do it, but I got a chance to attend Morehouse College, went to law school at Emory, and I have served as a prosecutor since 1976. Started working for the city. I spent 4 years as a defense attorney. My main client then was Bobby Brown, so I got a lot of work. But I have been a prosecutor ever since, and it is what I enjoy. And the reason that I enjoy it, because again, I see myself as being a gatekeeper for justice for our community, to make sure that we're safe, that families and children, that they can live here in our county and they can live here in safety.
Well, I welcome you both here. I think it's great that we're able to use this as a forum to reach out to the community, to the culture and the generation, because a lot of people have mixed feelings about the voting process. They have mixed feelings about every position held in the justice system and politics, especially district attorneys, because you're the person that they have to see before they go to jail usually. And a lot of times, now don't get me wrong, there are some people who break the law and they need to go to jail. True enough. But it's also sometimes district attorney can go outside of the law in name of the law. And the good thing about this place, the good thing about this audience is they see straight through the bullshit, so you ain't even got to play your political card here. You can, use what we call cowboy logic, you know what I'm saying, and get straight to the point. This will not be a traditional campaign stop. We would like to just have a conversation, a conversation about your platform, about your background, about the present state of the community and how we all feel we could be progressively involved in instituting change. So if you all right with that, let's get straight into it.
Let's get it.
Okay, so first I'd be remiss, Mr. Howard, not to acknowledge the fact that it's been a pretty taxing week for you. Given the recent charges that you announced against Officers Garrett, Rolfe, and Devin, Brosnan, things heated up. Now, a lot of people said that, you only did that because, you're in the midst of a political campaign. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that they could rightfully say that if we had not done the same thing before in the DA's office. The first case that we actually prosecuted involving a police officer occurred in 2002, and it involved a young black kid by the name of Corey Ward that people will probably remember, who was shot in his mother's own vehicle. And we indicted the police officer who was responsible for that. We had one of our Superior Court judges, however, who used immunity to dismiss that case. But since that time, we have prosecuted 39 other cases involving police officers. 9 of those cases involved instances where police officers killed civilians. So we've done it before. We've also now handled 4 cases that we indicted or asked that the police officer be arrested before there was an indictment. That's what we did in the case involving Officer Rourke and Officer Brosnan. So when people say that it was political, I would say, absent our record, you could make that contention. But I think when you look at what we've done in the past, what you say is, that's what they've been doing all the time.
Man, I think that it's very important to give credit where credit is due and acknowledgement where it is warranted. And your team's hard work with this tragic case is an example of that. I also just want to know if you've been in touch with the Brooks family and if you know how they're doing, in light of, the recent news.
Well, I went over to Mrs. Miller, Tamika Miller, who is the husband of Mr. Brooks. I went over to her
Well,
house.
you said, try to just say it it over again.
Tamika Miller, who is the wife of Mr. Brooks, who was the gentleman who was killed. On Saturday morning, shortly after he was killed, I went over to the house to meet with her. And already, you start seeing things that our system has to improve. It was Miss Miller informed me at that time. I guess we arrived at her house sometime around noon, and the police department had not notified her about her husband's death. She was so upset because she did not even realize that her husband had been taken to Grady, and they had actually started operating on him before he passed, and nobody had even called Miss Miller to let her know that he was in the hospital. So the first thing she found out that her husband was dead when the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, they came over not to notify her, but they came over to interview her. So when I got there, she was feeling really bad. She had just celebrated a birthday for her 8-year-old daughter, and so they were in a festive mood, and then on to really tear it apart, she then had to find out about her husband. So on yesterday, when we made our presentation in court, I asked her to be there along with her attorney and her family, and she was there. But what I did not realize is she had not viewed the videotape. Also, before the presentation, I had to explain to her that during the presentation, we were going to present the photographs of the police officer standing on her husband and the photograph of one of the police officers kicking her husband. And she told me at that time that she thought that she could take it, but as we were describing the incidents during the presentation, she finally just had to get up and leave. And she told me she just couldn't even stand to hear what had happened to her husband on that day.
Understandably so. Understandably so.
Yeah, see, it was a traumatic incident for her and the family. I'm glad that she is being handled by Chris Stewart, who you know, who's an outstanding attorney, who is providing some good advice. And when you get a chance to see people like Ms. Miller, I've met many families like that before, that is what drives me to say that we have got to come to some policy and statutory solutions in our country so that this will stop happening. This just can't keep happening to people like Miss Miller.
Yeah, I concur. Now, since then, you have faced some adverse opinions to your decision to bring charges on these officers, even in light of, you know, the newly found video footage of them kicking Rayshard and standing on him. Why do you think it's so shocking to the department that you would charge them even after what the video shows?
Well, it's been my experience that police officers feel that that they should not be held responsible when they are involved in shootings like this one. What I hear from them is it happened in a split second, and they don't believe people should second guess them for the split second. They believe that,
I want to touch on that for a minute. Now, this is just, I really want to know the perspective of a professional who made a conscious decision to get into a certain line of work that you knew was dangerous before you made the decision to involve yourself in this line of work. And also, you go through training to endure or to mimic or to replicate these traumatic, dangerous environments you may place yourself in. Yet and still, you still want the excuse of I was afraid. Yeah. So the I was afraid, you have to, the first attribute to being a policeman is being courageous. Yeah. You must be courageous in order to be a policeman. If you scary and you shaky, then you need to maybe
get another job.
Try a hairstylist.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But if you are going to be a policeman, that means that day in, day out, for the sake of the safety of the community, you place yourself in these situations because you are prepared.
Right.
and because you're courageous. And for you to place all of the accountability on citizens who have not been trained, who did not make a conscious decision to get into a dangerous line of work, this is not their responsibility. They did not take an oath. They are, so you can't place all of the accountability on the citizens and expect 100% impunity to come to trained professionals who are supposed to be trained professionals. What is the logic behind that? Is it just sheer delusion of grandeur?
Well, I believe, and I agree with you, it is totally illogical. It's irrational for somebody to say that every time we shoot somebody, I was in fear of my life, and it happened so quickly, I just couldn't make a rational decision about it. So the way that the law now expresses what should happen is that rather than the case being judged from that officer's state of mind, it is judged from what a reasonable police officer would have done. And this is the thing that we saw in this case.
Now I have one more thing to say to that. A lot of people say it's the training. I don't think it's the training, because we're being shown time and time again that police officers know how to treat citizens whenever they deal with white people.
Right.
Whenever they deal with white people, they seem to know exactly how to be polite, courteous, tactful, professional. They seem to know exactly what to say, exactly, when to use more excessive force. Right. However, when the skin tone changes, so does the approach, the mentality, and the procedure. So I don't think it's the training.
Well, let me say this, and I'm probably will get in trouble for saying this, but
it wouldn't be the first time you got in trouble, Paul. So I think you can take it.
Let me tell you, the reason that I agree with what you're saying is when I saw them kick Mr. Brooks when he was laying on the pavement. When I saw one of those officers actually stand on Mr. Brooks's chest. He got off his chest, he moved around, and then he came back. He
stood on his chest?
He stood on his chest.
After, 2 wounds in the back?
The man was shot in his back and shot in the buttocks, and the officer stood on him. He then went to the other side of his body, and then he stood on his arm. And
rather than administer aid.
That's correct. That's what they did.
They stood on his chest, basically pushing the blood out of the wounds.
And so the reason I said that maybe this will get me in trouble is that for me, being an African-American man, I would rather sentence you for standing on the body even above you shooting him. Because I think standing on a man's body is the ultimate insult. An insult not only to him, but an insult to our community.
That's right.
Because when he did that, this man laid in a public parking lot over at Wendy's. And those policemen knew that there were many people standing there watching him. But they didn't care.
Right.
They did it anyway. But to your point, if you saw the video that took place, it lasted about 41 minutes. When you see the conversation between Mr. Brooks, and these 2 officers, you would never imagine that Mr. Brooks would end up dead.
Right.
Mr. Brooks was calm.
He was.
He was compliant.
Yep.
Every question that they asked Mr. Brooks, he answered it.
Right.
And I actually had my staff to count. They asked him the same question as many as 9 times.
Damn.
But Mr. Brooks answered every question.
Right.
And so finally they got to the point where Mr. Brooks just said to them, he said, hey, look, I'm going to be walking right over across the street to this hotel. He said, you got my car? You got my driver's license? He said, just let me walk over there. I agree with you because at that point, if Mr. Brooks had been another kind of man, that there's no way
a white man,
they would have continued to operate in the same way.
This is true.
So what this officer did, and I thought it was really important that we charged Officer Rolfe with an Atlanta police regulation. And what the regulation says is that when you arrest someone for a DUI, you have to immediately inform them that I'm placing you on arrest for a DUI.
Right.
But that's not what he did.
Right.
After carrying this very casual conversation, all of a sudden he moves to his rear and he attempts to restrain his arm. And when he did that, that was the first time that you saw any adverse conduct on the part of Mr. Brooks when his arm was grabbed and brought to his rear. And so what that said to me is that they had no reason to fear this man.
Right.
They had already asked him, did he have a weapon? Mr. Brooks told them no.
Right.
They asked him, could they pat him down? They patted him down, and the only thing that they found was a bulge in his pocket. And, you know, all of us have had some experience with the police. If you got a bulge in your pocket, most of us know what the police are going to do is they're going to ask you to take it out and let me see it.
Right.
They took the guy's word for it. He said, man, this is some money. He said, I think he said it was some dollar bills, which said to me they were very comfortable with him in the way that he was acting. So when Mr. Brooks tried to run, and that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to get away.
Right.
When he got the taser, he was trying to run away. And I know that the public was somewhat misled because they were shown a photograph or a videotape that showed Mr. Brooks firing the taser back at the officer. And what was said at that time was that is when the officer shot him. That is not true. That's not when the officer shot him. If you look at the tape very carefully, you'll see that they had moved Mr. Brooks and the officer some 10 or 12 feet beyond that point. It was beyond that point when they were about 18 feet 3 inches, because we measured it. That's how far they were apart. Mr. Brooks's back was turned to the officer, and that's when the officer fired the shot. And so, in my view, the officer had no reason to fear Mr. Brooks. He had no reason to fear that Mr. Brooks would harm anybody else because Mr. Brooks was simply trying to run. Because what he told the man is, I just want to go to the hotel across the street because his girlfriend was waiting over there. I think that's what he said. And he wanted to get over there. And he shot him in the back. And this is the thing that I think is critical for people trying to analyze this case. There's something in the law that's called excited utterance. And that is when somebody, in the heat of a moment, makes a statement, but they make the statement without having the time to consult with somebody, to ask a lawyer what to say, or, to read something. They just say what's on their mind. So in that moment, Officer Rolfe said, I got him. So if you interpret that, that doesn't sound like I'm scared of him.
Right.
I fear him.
Sounds as though you were hunting him.
He said, I got him. That's what he said.
Can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely.
I think it's important that we talk about the history and the culture of policing, right, based upon everything.
Well, I want you to get into that definitely, but just to I want to kind of paint the picture of the present circumstances due to the actions that were taken that night by the officers, due to the decision of Paul Howard's office and the administration, the present administration, to charge both of those officers. And there has been extreme pushback from law enforcement within the APD, even to the point of the officers said they weren't coming to work and they weren't answering calls. So I want to tell y'all officers something. I just want to say something to you officers who you feel that you are so high off the hog in your ivory tower, sitting high and looking low, to be the judge and jury for all, and you think that the community needs you so bad, in such dire need of such terrible people, so bad that you think your absence is a threat for us to change our actions in liberation, that's preposterous. You know what I'm saying? We can do bad by our goddamn self. You know what I'm saying? We don't really need y'all to do this. All you doing is adding to. You know what I mean? You are not helping. You do not help. Okay? So just do me a favor. If you don't come back today, you ain't come yesterday, stay your ass gone. Just stay your ass gone. Don't get no fuck. Stay your ass gone. We do not need you. And those are tips words. Okay? Now, with that being said, do you have any regrets for your actions, bringing charges? Do you have any regrets for that?
I do not. I think that we did the right thing. And I want to point this out. The police are supposed to notify us that when an incident occurred. But guess who I was notified by?
Tell me.
Christian Smith.
You were on the scene that night.
I was.
Yeah.
Christian was on the scene, man. You know, I had my my young demonstrators, man, the young people the organizers that kind of, you know what I'm saying, have been kind of leading the way for me, you know, in my short history as an activist. And they called me during it's like in the moment and said you were out there giving the police hell on the scene.
Yes, sir.
What pushes you to do like you? And mind you, you're not getting paid. You know what I'm saying? This is not an event that you're scheduled to be at. You just got a call and showed up.
Yes, sir.
What pushed you to do that?
It's what I'm fighting for. It's what people who look like me have been fighting for generations. It's equality through the lens of the justice system. It's to know that we are treated like human beings. And so my sole purpose in going out there was to make sure that the police were being transparent and that they were being accountable, because we know what's going around nationally in our country with the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. We had a Ahmaud Arbery here in Georgia. So many more, right?
So many more.
And so I knew that there would be a crowd there. And because of my past experience working in law enforcement, I knew that I would probably know some of the police officers there. And so I thought that my presence there would let them know, you know, no BS.
Right.
Like, let's be transparent. Let's be accountable. Let's let this crowd know what's going on. Let's make sure that the victim's family gets the transparency that they need. And I would say I was disappointed by the information that was relayed to me by the police officers that night. And then to hear what actually took place from the DA's office.
Yeah, man, I'm saying, like, that's just to hear you say you were there to make sure that there was no BS. You were there to ensure the crowd that the APD would do their job thoroughly and professionally. And instead, they kicked him and stood on his body.
Right. And so finding that out, of course I'm heartbroken. Of course I'm pissed off. I'm lied to that night that I'm out there. And so it goes to highlight even further why you have all these young people out marching and protesting.
Right.
Why we are picking up where the civil rights movement left off. Why we still need to make our voices known that black people were not looked at equally through the lens of the justice system. Absolutely. And I've worked as a prosecutor in the justice system. Right. And I've known that from being on the inside, that it takes DAs willing to step up and hold police officers accountable for these actions so that we can break this cycle, so that we can break the historical chains of how it came to be in the first place.
Right.
The policing system that we know stems from slavery.
Right. And
it's important to know our history, and it's important to know the mentality and the culture that police officers have. Is if you go back to 1865 when black codes were implemented post-slavery, this was the first set of laws on the books that criminalized black skin. Because slavery was legal. So now that slavery is over, lawmakers made black codes which said that black people could be criminalized for vagrancy laws, poor living conditions. The folks who fought in the Civil War could be disarmed. We could be criminalized and victimized from anything at the hands of law enforcement. And so if you take a system and a culture that is praised and taught and trained to victimize us
Right.
and kill us
Right.
and brutalize us
Right.
and look at us as less than, that culture and that DNA is still present in our police departments today. Look at this. If you go from 1865, just keeping it here to Atlanta,
Sure.
we don't get our first black police officer until 1948. So you're talking about over 100 years of history where police officers are all white men. And there is no accountability for killing black folks, for lynching black folks,
Right.
for robbing and raping and whatever police officers have done to our people throughout history.
Sure.
And so that is the systemic oppression and racism that folks talk about
Right.
when we're talking about systemic racism, that white people or people who either don't know or don't care about history fail to acknowledge. We need to know that system and that history so that we can break away from it, because the actions that I'm hearing that this man took that night by kicking somebody and standing on his body, it perpetuates everything that I've just been talking about.
It's criminal.
It is.
It's criminal and it's lawless. And it is a slap in the face of justice. It spits in the face of democracy. And it is not a fair representation of what this city of Atlanta stands for and has stood for since I have been here on this earth. Now, Christian, you had a somewhat of a revolutionary run of a campaign. You, of course, due to COVID, you know, everybody got to campaigning a little later than they would have liked to.
Right.
But I saw you pull people out that had never even voted before, had never even considered voting before. Your passion has become infectious to the point where, you know, I mean, you had a march from our alma mater, Douglas High School, all the way down to another landmark on the west side, Club Crucial.
Yes, sir.
And you spoke with the people, for the people, to the people in the parking lot of Club Crucial. How did you get the hood to embrace you like that?
Because I'm from the hood. And like you started off this show, people can see through the BS. And by the grace of God, I was able to overcome all of the obstacles and pain that I grew up with. But I've always been true to myself.
Right.
And I've always felt this sense of responsibility that if I made it, I need to bring other people with me.
Okay.
That I'm not going to be one of those folks who say, hey, I made it, you figure out a way. Nah, if I eat, we all eat.
That's right.
And so I use this opportunity from working through the justice system as a way to try to correct the justice system. Because if nobody has the experiences that I have, if nobody looks at it through the lens that I look at it, if nobody is a prosecutor who knows what it feels like to see your mom in jail, who knows what it feels like to see your grandmother there, who knows what it feels like to see your family and your community destroyed by this system, then they're not going to feel the way that I feel about it.
Right.
And so being able to come from that and be here, I said, I got to educate my people on what it really is in the system, and I got to educate my people on how we can really change the system.
Right.
And I want people to know that it starts with people like us, the people who have been the victims of the system, the people who have been destroyed by it. That's who I represent. And I'm here to say, the way that it's been done for so long,
Right.
we can't keep doing it that way.
Right.
And Mr. Howard falls into that category, right? We were excited to see you be the first black DA in Fulton County history. But unfortunately, you know, for whatever the reasons were, we still saw the tough on crime on a black community. We still saw the destruction. We still saw the high conviction rates. And so I wanted to come in and completely change that narrative and say, I realized that a lot of crimes are committed because people were trying to survive.
Okay.
Because I've been there.
Right.
And that's how I grew up. And I saw it. And so we take those moments of people trying to survive and we use our brain power and our wisdom and our knowledge being attorneys, and we figure out ways for people to change their lives for the better. We figure out ways to get people to stop coming into contact with the system instead of keeping them in a system that's a revolving door, where we see them over and over, where we give them no hope, where they come out of jail not expecting anything different.
Right.
I wanted to completely change that narrative, and people were able to connect with that and feel that. And like you said, they were able to see through the BS, and that's why so many people supported me, and I'm grateful for every last one of y'all who did.
Right on. And now, okay, so Mr. Howard, you have, man, you not only have you been the DA, you were the first African-American district attorney in the state of Georgia.
Yeah.
And you were elected first in 1994?
1996 is when I elected. Took office in January of 97.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, but even before then, you were working as a prosecutor.
Solicitor General of the State Court of Fulton County from 1992 until 1996.
Let me just ask you a question now. This is just totally off. This is off the beaten path, but I just want to know. So did you have anything to do with the Tupac case? Remember when Tupac was charged for shooting those cops?
No, I didn't.
You had nothing to do with it. Okay. I just wanted to know, man. I was going to say he beat y'all ass in that one. He got y'all ass on that one. Nah, man. But listen, real spill, man. The community don't necessarily see eye to eye. Okay, I'm really downplaying it. They are outraged by the amount of time that you've given out in your tenure for nonviolent drug offenses. What do you have to say about that, and how do you intend to move forward in how should you be elected? How would you intend to move forward knowing how the community feels, knowing what you know now?
The thing that I want people to understand is to understand how our city was existing at the time that I started as district attorney. When I started as district attorney in 1997, our county in the city of Atlanta was just run amok with crime. And so when I started, what people were begging is for somebody to do something about the violence in our community. Atlanta, as you might remember, was referred to as the murder capital of the South. They referred to some of our neighborhoods as Little Vietnam because there were
East Lake Meadow.
Yeah, because there were so many people that got killed. And so I would have communities and mothers and leaders to say, hey, look, you got to do something, because we cannot have, I believe the year before I was elected, we had 187 people that were killed, most of them young black men.
Okay.
And so what I was charged to do was to try to develop a DA's office and to work with people in the criminal justice system to reduce that number. And over the years since I've been in office, we have reduced the violence rate in the city of Atlanta by 70%. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that just happened because violence was reduced every place. And I think you and I both know that's not true, because if you take a county like DeKalb County, in fact, the number of homicides in DeKalb County since I've been in office, the increase has been 78%. While on the other hand, we have had a reduction in violent crime. In fact, the 187 homicides that took place in 1996, by the time we got to 2017, I believe, we had dropped to 79 homicides in our community. But one of the things that that has happened in our community is there comes a point where some of the sentences that might have been appropriate when all of that crime went on, those sentences aren't as appropriate as you get forward in years that were from 2015 and above. So, and I think that's what people say, we need to make a change. And so...
Are you committed to change, Mr. Howard?
Let me tell you something.
Okay.
What I want to do is to make our community a safe place to live. It's not like I want a conviction or I want to send somebody to jail. In fact, people laugh at me because when they ask me, what is your goal for our city? And I always tell them this, man, I would really like for Atlanta to become like Mayberry. And,
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about Mayberry with Magic City. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead. You got to have a little entertainment. Okay, I'm sorry, Mr.
Well,
Howell. Go ahead.
And the reason I stated it because, as you remember, Mayberry had one sheriff.
And no black people.
No black people. Well, I remember one episode, they did have one black guy, but other than that, but they had one deputy.
Yeah.
And you remember the deputy only had one bullet.
That's right.
And he kept the bullet in his pocket.
Yeah.
And so, but what it represented is a place that was safe. So as I started looking at Mayberry.
Now, when you talk about Mayberry, you talk about Boniface the deputy. I have a little adage that comes from Andy Griffith, and it says there once was a deputy named Bonnie. Mm-hmm. He often kept a gun and a knife. His gun was all rusty and his knife was all dusty, and he never caught a crook in his life.
That's absolutely true.
So, you know what I'm saying? That just comes from just my memory of the Superstation, Channel 17, Ted
correct.
Turner's channel. You know, I used to watch it religiously. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
With the German Shepherd.
Yes, sir.
People probably don't remember that when the only thing we could watch was baseball reruns and wrestling. That's all that we had to watch.
The Superstation. Go ahead, Mr. Howard.
Anyway,
I'm sorry for trailing.
No, that's all right, because what I said is, well, but in order to get to Mayberry, maybe there's a middle point. And so as I looked around the country, I saw a city like Kings County, Washington, where Seattle is located.
Right, most billionaires in one county.
That's correct.
Yes.
And Kings County is the only county in the country that's named after Dr. King. And when I looked at Kings County, I saw that the population of Seattle was almost 300,000 more than the city of Atlanta. So, for instance, if you look at, I believe, the year of 2016, in Atlanta, we had 116 homicides.
Okay.
In Seattle, they had 26. So I'm asking, so what's the difference?
I'm going to tell you what the difference is. Poverty.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Poverty. So there is not a coincidence that Kings County, who boasts as being the richest county, having the most billionaires registered in that county, having the lowest crime rate.
Right.
Because people aren't struggling, dying, robbing just to eat.
Absolutely.
So where there is desperation,
that's correct.
There will be poverty, and where there's poverty, more often than not, there will be violence and violent crimes.
Well, let me tell you, the reason that you are so wise, and I didn't say it just because I'm sitting here, when I talk about Seattle to most people, the crazy thing, the first thing they ask me, they'll say, tell me about the demographics. Because what they're really insinuating is, well, they must not have any black people in Seattle.
Well, they don't have that many.
They don't have that many.
And another thing about Kings County that I'll tell you, although the crime is very low, I will tell you they have the highest suicide rate.
Right.
So,
But-
just give you a little
But the thing that you mentioned
flip side.
is the thing that we saw that is the significant difference between that location and Atlanta.
Okay.
The average household household income in Seattle at that time was $74,000 a year.
Damn.
In Atlanta, it was $23,000. 23,000 versus 74,000.
Right.
It is that gap. And so the reason that I said that is because you begin to understand it's not the number of people that you put in jail. What we've got to remember is jail and the criminal justice system is just kind of like the end of the process. There's a whole nother process that goes on that produces the kind of environments that send people to jail.
Right.
And that environment is an economic one. So what now I have to remind people, you can come up with all kind of schemes and for how we handle things in the criminal justice system. But when you do that, you really miss the critical portion, and that is the word that you mentioned, poverty.
Yeah.
It's providing income. So that's why over the last several years, we have been doing something that we thought was a lot more important. And that is, for instance, with our expungements in our office, getting rid of criminal records.
So you mean to tell me that, okay, so so somebody who you sentenced to a nonviolent drug offense, say back in the late 90s, early 2000s, could have served their time, finished their probation and or parole, and you are now going to help them
get the record clean. So what we did is we paid from our own budget in our office a lobbyist, and for the last 3 years, we have been trying to get a bill passed before our legislators. We're hoping that it'll pass this year. And what it will do is, if you've got the criminal record that you described, if you hadn't had another incident in 5 years, then your record would be expunged and sealed. What that means is that person would be able to get a job. We looked at the other states in this country, and I think about 38 states have already passed the same legislation. And what was important to me is that in every one of the states where it passed, the unemployment rate dropped an average of 2.6% once it passed. But the other thing that's important is when they passed the law, the crime rate went down in every one of the states that it was passed. And so the lesson that I have learned is that you've got to still, as Bill Clinton says, you got to look at the economy, stupid, because it's that poverty that you talked about. It's that gap between poor people and people who have other means. It doesn't make any difference what nationality or race they are. It's because of that gap. That is what creates crime. If you move the people in Seattle to Fulton County in Atlanta, if they had the same gap in opportunity and economic abilities, then I think you would have the same crime rate.
Certainly.
And I'm hoping that we will continue to recognize that, not fool ourselves to believe that, we somehow can lose or reduce the way that people live because of something that we do in the criminal justice system. We got to keep reminding ourselves, guys, there's something else that's going on, and the criminal justice system has to support those institutions, because those are the institutions that I believe will make the difference in keeping our crime rates low.
So I got to chime in on this one.
Sure.
It's interesting that we're talking about Seattle, because throughout my campaign, one of the things that I wanted to implement here in Fulton County was based off of a program out of Seattle. So in 2011, they implemented a program called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assistant Diversion. If you are arrested for drug possession or prostitution, instead of taking you through the traditional route of prosecution, they give you the opportunity to be aligned with services to help you break out of that lifestyle. Whether it be mental health treatment, if you dropped out of school and you need a GED, if you have a substance addiction problem, they get you help with that. So I went out there in 2018 for a couple of days and studied this program. And I sat with their prosecutors and their police officers and their public defenders and their city council people and their community. And they have all invested into this program where the prosecutor, being at the hub or being the leader of the justice system, says, you know what, instead of just throwing all of these things in jail, adding on to these conviction rates and giving these people records and perpetuating this system where they won't have employment and stay in poverty, let's partner with these community service providers to help them break out of this, to help our crime rate go down, to help our employment rate go up. So I don't want it to get missed in the conversation that was going on between you two, that the DA does not have the power to do that, because Seattle also did that, and that was one of the things that I wanted to bring here to Fulton County. So the DA does have power to help people break out of those lifestyles. The DA does have the power to not only send people to jail, but to get them the treatment that they need to help them break out of lifestyles if the DA prioritizes that.
Right on. You've seemed to have found you found quite the liking to Mr. Christian Wise Smith as of late. What do you find intriguing about his platform?
Well, I first of all, I have to say that when I heard him and I saw him, what I saw was a real development. I mean, from how we had communicated in the past, and I saw how he had really merged all of his ideas, and he was able to really express them to people in a way that they could not only understand, but I got the impression that they felt what he was saying about the things that he meant. And so as we've gotten together and we've talked about 4 or 5 things. We've talked about diversion. I've got some diversion programs we already had at our office, but after talking to Christian, I could see that there was some real room that we needed for expansion. And so we're going to start working on those things. One of the other things that we talked about is the thing that we discussed earlier, and that is the issue of police brutality. So through my conversations with him, I've actually now decided that we're going to make reducing police brutality a major function of the DA's office. And so we're actually going to set up a separate department.
A task force for police brutality.
To start to attack it.
What? You're going to have cops to find cops being bad cops. That's
correct. Well, what we want to do is that we want to.
That's a very bold statement, Mr. Howard. Are you sure you want to go on record saying that?
I guess I'm already with this last incident.
You the ringleader.
Yeah, bad enough. So, but those are some of the things we talked about. In the educational realm, we talked about partnerships and communications with the Atlanta public school system and with the Fulton County school system. And so those are the kinds of things that we talked about working together to get done for our community. The issue with police brutality, we felt it's really important. You talked about the policemen that were not coming to work.
Right.
And I heard one of the policemen say today that they weren't coming because they were tired of some of the things that went on.
The nerve.
Well, but
they can't be no more tired than we is of seeing people die.
That's what Christian and I talked about. We're tired too.
Yeah.
I'm tired. I'm tired of having to prosecute the cases. Tired of going to the funerals.
Right.
Tired of going to the memorials.
Right.
So I'm gonna tell you, however tired they are, I don't think they're more tired than we are.
Right.
To make sure that these things don't keep happening again.
Now, speaking of police brutality, Mr. Howard, you've been criticized by former Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields and the International Brotherhood of Police Officers over your decision to charge 6 policemen for the violent arrest of 2 Atlanta college students who were tased and pulled from their car during demonstrations over the death of Brother George Floyd. What's your response to that criticism?
Well, I was really kind of amazed that they were criticizing me for doing it. If you saw that video and you saw the way that they abused not only Messiah Young, the young man, but the young lady, Mrs. Pilgrim, who was tased, who was sitting in the car, trembling, screaming. You could see the electrical current being shot through her body. They pulled her out, threw her down face first on the pavement. And, when watching it, I was just thinking about if I were her father.
Right.
Man, I'm thinking like, what, I don't know what I would have done if I saw the way that they treated her. I just thought it was outrageous. She was never charged with a criminal offense.
Right.
They told the young man, they said, hey, either you go or you go to jail. And when they told him that, the young guy drove forward.
Right.
And after he drove forward, they then went up to try to break in his car for going forward. So after that, I heard the police.
How can paid professionals expect to operate this way?
Well, I just thought it was because the police chief was so outraged by the conduct that she immediately fired him. And for the police department, I think everybody knows that that's really unusual,
Right.
that they would fire somebody on the spot. And so once we viewed the videotape, we had 8 high-quality videotapes that showed us everything that they did. What is it that we had to wait for?
Right.
So we simply did something that was a consequence of what the police had already done. But let me just tell you this. I am not surprised at the characterization of charging the police as political. Every time we've prosecuted policemen, the union always says that what we've done is political. And it's not just true here with the city of Atlanta. If you check around the country, whenever there is some action taken against a police officer, if there's a police union, that activity is always characterized by the union calling it political. What we did was not for political gain, but it was based upon human pain, because that's what those kids suffered.
Right.
And if I had to do it again, what I would try to do, I would try to charge them a day earlier than what we charged them, because you should never treat 2 people,
Right.
and you definitely shouldn't treat somebody that I would regard as a child
Right.
the way they treated those 2 folks.
I mean, so the International Brotherhood of Police Officers, also known as the IBPO, you've accused the IBPO of being out of touch with reality and engaging in a politically motivated plan to influence the primary in order to end police prosecutions in Fulton County. Tell me, what did you mean by that?
Well, what I meant by that is this is what they have done, not only here in our community, but every place that they seek candidates to endorse. They want a candidate who's going to say, I am not going to prosecute policemen.
Do they not? Would they actually say that?
They would say it to you.
They would say, are you going to prosecute?
Are you going to prosecute policemen? Because are you going to prosecute people like Paul Howard? That's what they'd say. Because if you answer that question, yes, I'm going to prosecute people like Paul Howard, they are not going to endorse you.
Well, now I'm saying that just gives me, a moment to reflect. It makes it a temple tapper, too, because you have a runoff coming up against Fonnie Willis.
Right.
You have said, we, the community, recently questioned her about this. You said that the Atlanta Police Union and former Atlanta City Council member Mary Norwood, a Republican and 2-time candidate for mayor who lost against Keisha Lance Bottoms and 1 time against Kasim Reed. Why do you continue to say that?
Because it's true.
Okay, so wait a minute. So you say the police union has endorsed Fonnie Willis.
That's correct.
And after you just said that the police union sits down with candidates that they're considering endorsing, and asks, will they prosecute policemen?
Right.
And if they say, yes, I will prosecute policemen, they will not.
They will not endorse it.
They will not endorse. But they are endorsing Fonnie Willis.
That's correct.
Okay. And former council member Miss Mary Norwood, I remember a bit about her platform. I think, it's fair to say Atlanta being the city that I know, I see her as someone who wants to come and kill the culture of Atlanta. She wants to close the studios. She wants to shut down the strip club. She wants, she wants a lot more Buckhead and a lot less Bankhead. What do you think Miss Mary Norwood's endorsement of Fonnie Willis, what do you think that represents?
I think it's 2 things. I think one of the things that we have to look at is, again, this whole idea of prosecuting policemen. The police union endorsed Mary Norwood when she ran for mayor against Keisha Bottoms. They've become very aggressive in trying to stop Paul Howard in the DA's office from prosecuting cases. And so when Mary Norwood and her Buckhead council would meet, one of the things that they would do is
Mary Norwood is head of the Buckhead Council.
Well, I don't know if she's the head of it, but
she's the face.
She is the face of it.
Okay.
And what they would discuss is rather than bringing the regular police to the meetings, they brought the police union to the meetings. And so they would spend time and they would make statements like the DA gives more time to police officers than he does to regular criminals. That's what they would say. And so they also want to stop the prosecution of police officers because what they believe is that it is somehow wrong for them to ever be prosecuted. The other thing that happened is we started a program in the DA's office called Project Level Up. It involves juvenile offenders. And what we decided to do, these are the offenders who had already been arrested 3 times. But rather than trying to put them in a juvenile detention facility, what we talked about is providing aftercare, mentors, and family intervention so that they would not have to go to jail. Mary Norwood and her crowd did not like that. What they wanted to do was to ask us to send them to jail. And I believe that's why when they approached Christian Smith, but that is exactly what Mary Norwood was asking him to do, is are you willing to send these young black kids to jail? I'm not willing to do that, and I think that's what she asked Christian, whether or not he was willing to do it, because if he wasn't willing to do it, she wasn't going to support him.
Is there any truth to this?
Yes. So I want to be clear about why I'm sitting here with Paul today and why I'm not sitting here with Fonnie. I did a lot better in this primary than most people thought I would do. Of course, myself and my family and supporters thought we would win. The message won. Our movement won.
Right.
But over 35,000 people voted.
People who would not have normally voted. Thousands of people who had first-time voters. I think that's what's most impressive. The number of first-time voters and people who would not have normally come out, even, in light of voter suppression that exists, that, the people had every reason to be discouraged from voting.
Yes, sir.
And you still brought out very impressive numbers. And, with the support of people like myself and even my partner Palais from the Franchise Boys, man, Bankhead, born home, native. So what was it, for one, I would like to talk a little bit about your, I guess, the conversation that you had when you had to consider the questions of Mary Norwood for endorsement, and also the police union, if there has been any discussion. Did you feel when you were having these discussions that they were asking you about the prosecution of policemen and their endorsement was contingent upon your answer?
So, first, I never spoke to the police union.
Okay, gotcha.
I never even had a conversation with them.
They knew better than to come sit down.
Exactly. And I think red flags go off in my head when a DA is endorsed by the police union. Although our jobs require us to work with police officers, our job is not to turn a blind eye to the misconduct of police officers.
Right.
So, one, they never spoke to me. But with Mary Norwood, I jumped in the race first to run against Paul. I mean, he's run on the polls for I don't know how long. I saw this as an opportunity to advance this movement and message forward now. And in January, early on in my campaign, Mary Norwood and her group from the Buckhead Council had a meeting with me at the state capitol. And at the end of the meeting, Mary approached me and said, if you want my endorsement, if you want me to open up my resources to the Buckhead business community, you have to agree to publicly say you will put juvenile offenders on prison farms to do manual labor.
What?
And I want you to close the city of, or repurpose the city of Atlanta jail as a diversion center. And so my initial immediate response to her was, I'm not going back to slavery, and I'm not tap dancing for money or an endorsement. And so she turned red and walked away. And so after Fonnie Willis jumped in the race, and after we learned that she was endorsed by Mary Norwood,
you knew exactly what it took.
At one of the debates we had, I made it a point to not. I felt like my message spoke louder than me taking attacks at Paul or Fonnie. I did that very, 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 very little in my campaign. But in this one particular debate, instead of throwing it out there generally, I posed the question to Fonnie directly. I said, what did you have to agree to get Mary's endorsement? And I want to take it a step further if you allow me a couple more minutes to speak.
Sure.
After I did not prevail in the primary, congratulations to Paul and Fonnie. But I understand what the 35,000 plus votes I earned represents.
Right.
And so in respecting the process of who I would support, because I'm not going to take the easy way out and say I'm not picking somebody.
Right.
You have to be, a man behind your loss, and I'm still a voter and a citizen of Fulton County, and people care about who I'm going to vote for. So I spoke to both of them. I met with both of them in person.
Right.
And one of my questions to Fonnie was, would she give the money back? Because the people who support me,
I was there.
I was going to get to that. I'm being transparent about everything. The people who support me have an issue with her being supported by Mary Norwood.
Right.
And so I said, hey, would you give that money back to gain our trust so these people can believe in you? She said no. You being there, I did not know this was coming. This was a complete surprise and shock to me. You said, what if I replace the money right now? She still said no.
I did offer to give her dollar for dollar every dollar that Mary Norwood contributed to her campaign. I said I would give you whatever she's giving you. I'd give it to you if you denounce her endorsement. And she said no. Now, mind you, Paul, that was way before I found out how much money it was. You know what I'm saying? I didn't know. Now I will say that.
Now you kind of glad she said no.
Woo! Man,
You don't get to ask that question.
Did you see how much I almost got myself into? Nah, man, but to be honest with you, man, to save this city, it would have been a small price to pay.
And taking it a step even further, we spoke about the police union endorsement after that.
Yeah.
And I broke down to her, my campaign manager broke down to her, the perception that this gives off by you being backed by certain groups who, again, I love history, talking about the history of the plight of black people in the justice system. These two folks, Mary and the police union, represent the oppression of us going forward. She was not willing to come off of either of those endorsements or the money that came behind their endorsements for the people.
Right.
That is why I'm sitting here with Paul and not her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important. And I guess we're gonna bring this thing on in, man, because I think it's important that people understand exactly what the changes are that you hope to see, or that you have been made to believe you will see in supporting Brother Howard. And how do you intend to go about executing?
So one,
together, collectively, and I'm gonna let you know, Mr. Howard. I'm gonna go wherever Christian go. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna just let you know that, so you can say that right here, the expediTIously.
And you don't even have to pay no money.
It didn't even cost me nothing. Woo! I dodged the good one. Goodness. But yeah, man, because I trust and believe. While I trust and believe Christians' motivation to apply change to a broken system, and I trust in your bravery in standing in the fire, doing things that most people would tuck tail and be afraid to do. Now, that doesn't mean you did everything perfectly along the way here, but I must give credit where credit is due. You have shown up and shown out in recent times. So I really, really, really want to applaud you for that. But you know what? It just really tapping me on my shoulder. So I got to say it. Okay, so let's talk about the Atlanta Public School, the APS situation, because that's one thing that really, really, it grinds my gears, man. So I don't want to be that person who I don't want to be that person who does not speak on it, because I've been praising you and I think you deserve all the praise, but I think you may need to speak just a minute about the Atlanta cheating scandal.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, Tip, and I appreciate you asking me this, because this is one of the things that in talking with Christian that I figured out that I should have done. I spent a lot of time working on that case. I should have spent more time working with the community to talk about the case. Because when it happened, people were not focused upon the same issue that I was focused upon.
Okay.
And that was the issue with the children. They were focused upon the charge that was attached to the teachers. And I believe that if I and my office had spent more time talking to community leaders and working with them about what we were doing, I think maybe people might have at least got a chance to see what we thought was the major wrong. And what we were talking about is changing from wrong to right about 256,000 answers.
Okay.
When I say that to people, most people are like, what are you talking about? It's 256,000 change from wrong answers to right answers. And this is the thing that's so incredible. In 2009, I believe, after they switched over from having the Atlanta public school system to monitor those tests, they turned it over to the state of Georgia.
Right.
Once they turned it over to the state of Georgia, the number of wrong to right answers changed from the 256,000, I believe, to less than 100. What people also don't know, and that's because we did a bad job of communicating with people about it, is that in a meeting that was held by Ambassador Young, he doesn't like you to call him ambassador, but I tell him I call him ambassador. But he set up the meeting. We met with the superintendent, the former superintendent Hall, and after Ambassador Young had presented what he thought was the issue, she agreed to enter a guilty plea. And most people don't even know that she had agreed to enter a guilty plea. And so what really would have changed the whole way that this case had been looked at, because we thought that what went on was something that was headed by her. So I'm hoping that I can now, after from this point, I hope that I can meet with the people who are involved with this case. I'm hoping that somehow we can figure out a way to get it behind us.
Can we make corrections and move beyond this without any egregious punishment?
So I've been talking to Christian and I've been talking, and we're going to figure out a way that we can make this thing right, because it's important for me that our community can move on.
Right.
That we can look at each other and say, okay, all right, we dealt with it, now let's move on so we can do what's right. And I am committed to do that. I'm committed to do it. And so I'm looking forward for the opportunity to make sure that this does work out with APS.
It's important to know this point too. In my meetings with both him and Fonnie, that was one of my concerns, was correcting this black eye that's been on Atlanta since the case happened. So when I asked them both if they were willing to at least have a conversation to see how we could make this go away so that these educators could move on, his response was, we'll have a conversation. Her response was, are they finally willing to admit they're wrong? If they don't do that, we can't have a conversation.
Right.
So again, and I'm making these things known and transparent because the folks who support me need to know this. They need to know why I'm not sitting here with her. And I think I've been public about my dislike for him, and that it took me putting my personal feelings for him to the side to even have these meetings about what the greater good can be.
But you have seen, even with whatever personal discrepancies you may have had in the past, but you still feel sincerely and genuinely that you would have a better time and a better opportunity to work things out with Paul Howard than you would with Fonnie Willis.
Absolutely. In my meeting with her, I didn't get anything. My people didn't get anything. Our platform and our message and our movement did not get anything.
Well, Paul Howard it is. I guess I would like to thank you all today. I think it's really that simple, man. We are the voice of the community. We speak for the people. We have a genuine interest and a sincere passion to fill the gap and consider the concerns of the people. And whoever can assist us in our efforts is who we will support. Simple as that. I want to ask you one last question, man. Brother Howard, in the illustrious career that you've had as a prosecutor, coming from such humble beginnings when you and your class went into that courtroom, and I know that you have, you see Atlanta as the utopia of Mayberry. I see it as the utopia of Wakanda. It's the same thing, but very different. But I want to know from you, what is the thing that you've done in your career that you're most proud of?
Well, let me tell you, we seized a crack house on Atwood Avenue in the West End. When I was first, the crack house was brought to my attention. It was on the corner, and there were so many people coming to the house that they had, when they drove up, they had crushed the sidewalks in front of the house. And the day that I went over, you could just see traffic. And most of these folks, man, were from Cobb and Gwinnett County coming over to buy drugs at this house.
Right.
Well, anyway, next door to this house, there was an elderly family. And the woman who lived next door, she called me over, and she told me, and she said, please, can't you do something to close that house down? She said they shooting and they fighting and they littering up the neighborhood, and everybody else in the neighborhood is trying to move. But she said, I don't want to move out of my house, and I can't afford to move, Mr. Howard. I'm stuck. And so her husband was standing over there near him, and the man had his grill on the inside of the house. And I asked his wife, I said, why does he have the grill on the inside of the house? He said, Mr. Howard, we can't come out on our porch anymore and grill because of those folks over there selling drugs. So when we finally closed the house, we got some companies to help us remodel it. We put a policeman in the house for about 2 years, and the crime in the neighborhood dropped by 70%. So we had a big celebration to when the policeman moved in, and we had a band and we had hot dogs. I love hot dogs. But the day when I went over there, man, I was standing on the front porch and I could smell some ribs. And I looked over to the house next door, and there was her husband, man. He was out in the front yard, and he was grilling, and he waved at me. He smiled, and it was like he was saying, like, finally, y'all did something about this crime. So out of all the cases I've had, all the employees I've had, all the experiences I've had, I will never forget that man grilling. Because that's what I think DAs ought to do. They ought to allow our community to be grilling.
Right on, man.
Can I answer that question
Sure
too?
you can, man. What is the most, yeah, absolutely. I love to hear Mr. Christian Wise Smith, man. What is the thing that you are most proud of today in your career?
Justin Martin. Justin Martin was a 17-year-old senior in high school arrested on drug charges. And he came to court with his mom. He thought he was going to enter a no-low plea and go on about his life. And I said, well, where do you see yourself in 10 years? He said, playing in the NFL. I said, well, to play in the NFL, you got to play where first? College. You get convicted of this drug charge, you can't get financial aid to play in school.
Right.
So I made up a diversion program on the spot in front of the judge for Justin to raise his GPA, to pass a drug test, to do some community service and give back. And also take some classes on drugs just to educate himself about what he was doing to his body. Kid did everything. This was in 2013. In 2014, his mom emailed me and said, hey, thank you for giving my son a chance. He's playing at a junior college in Oklahoma, doing great in the classroom, wouldn't be here without you. 2015, she called and said, hey, My son transferred to the University of Tennessee. Got a chance to start this year. Thank you. We wouldn't be here without you. 2016, she said, hey, man, you got to come to a game. So I bought tickets. My kids and I went up to Knoxville to a game. His senior year, 2017, we went to 3. But the most important part of this story was that in 2018, I drove up to Knoxville to watch him get a bachelor's degree in communications. So I'm with Mr. Howard. We need to have our folks out there grilling.
Right.
But we also need to have our folks out there with opportunities.
That's
where
right.
they can change their lives and
That's
their
right.
families' lives and their community lives. Because DAs have the power to do that too.
Two very different approaches to prosecution. And I think that watching you guys work together for the greater good of the community is going to be a pleasure to see what you come up with. Now, before I let you guys go, we have a tradition here, okay? That tradition is the word of the week. So we usually pull a word out of the sky or my illustrious vocabulary, and we apply it to the conversation. It's a word that would either represent the guest or the discussion. The word for the week is incipient. Incipient, in an initial stage, beginning to happen or develop. Incipient means something is in an early stage of existence. Now what I do is I'm going to use it in a sentence so they can go on and take that word, pretend they've known it their whole life, giving none of us any credit for it, but you know, that's what we do here at Expeditiously. During the town hall, the protesters could feel incipient excitement building as the candidates took their seats to discuss injustice. Guys, I appreciate you for coming here, man. It's been a blast. Paul Howard.
All right.
Brother.
I'm going to take back the part about the money, but I'm
Man, you know what? We got a long time. Brother Christian. Been a pleasure working alongside you, and it will continue to be a pleasure.
Likewise.
Guys, thank you. This has been Expedition. Watch your favorite episodes of Expeditiously right now on the Expeditiously YouTube page.